Okay.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the House Salt Book Club. This month, we are talking about The Glass Hotel by Emily St. John Mandel. My name is Marines. My channel is My Name is Marines, and I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. I feel like it's 3 in my feelings, 4 in actuality, and probably 5 if I read it again.
Fair. I'm Sam from Thoughts on Tomes. I also gave it 4 stars. I read it earlier in the month, so in my feelings, it has kind of waned. So I think I'm similar to Mari, where it'd probably be like 3 stars in my feelings, but 4 to 5 stars for like the quality of the writing.
Hi, I'm Connor O'Brien. My channel is just Connor O'Brien, and I also gave this 4 stars. I just finished this book like 10 minutes ago, so I haven't really cemented my feelings on it yet.
I'm Jordan from the Jordan Journals, and this is very much not what I normally read. So I would say probably like enjoyment level, it was like a 2-star, but it's probably a very well-written book. So like in that essence, it's more of like a 4-star, but 2 for my enjoyment.
Doesn't match.
Someone has some strong opinions.
Yep.
I'm Liz, formerly of Liz Loves Lit. I had to look up my score again. I gave it 3, so I liked it, but I didn't love it. But it was enjoyable. I mean, it was easy to read, so.
And I'm Paige from Minimal Bookie. Like objectively, I think it's a 4-star read for me, but it wasn't what I was exactly expecting, so it became sort of like a 3.5 toward the end.
Yeah. Okay, so with a big mix of feelings, I didn't even know really where to start. This was such a like dense, and the plot is almost a little convoluted, I feel like. And it's like a lot of moving parts and a lot of characters all at the same time. So I guess we'll start there, just kind of, yeah. I could even be like, oh, let's talk about the characters, because literally I finished reading this today and I'm like, who are the characters? Because there are so many of them.
There's a lot of them. And it's not a big book. It's
Right.
Oh, it's tiny.
It is. And it moves really quickly. So it's something about like all of those moving parts. So I guess let's talk about that, like the plot in general, how you guys felt about it, what you took away from it, what you understood from it, like even trying to describe it, and it like reading the back of the book of it being like a Ponzi scheme, but a hotel made of glass. And you're like, how'd that work?
Well, I didn't read the synopsis of the book. I just went into it completely blind, only knowing that she wrote Station 11. So part of me was expecting like a sci-fi element to it, but there wasn't any of that. And that's why I was sort of like, oh, this is what I was expecting, and I didn't get it. But I still enjoyed, like, I didn't know any of the plot, that there was going to be a Ponzi scheme. So I was just reading for the characters themselves and trying to figure out like where all of their lives fit and where everything was going. So I think that's why I ended up enjoying it, because it was never like about the plot for me. It doesn't feel like there is like a plot per se. It's just like a lot of stuff happens to these people and we're just seeing how they all react. And like if they're going to redeem themselves, it felt like about passing of time more than anything for me. Yeah.
because at its core, it's really, I mean, I guess you'd say at its core, it's about a woman who disappears off a boat and why she disappeared and all the people in her life and how the like little interactions and relationships led to where she is. So I do like that, the kind of like layering on top of layering and seeing different people that are kind of outliers in her life. It reminds me a lot of like, I was trying to think of books that it reminds me of. It's kind of like The Bone Clocks by David Mitchell in like a weird way, like less like sci-fi-ish, or like I do like stories where like you have a bunch of like strangers and how they interact with each other. Mm-hmm. So I just like that kind of plot, but still you don't really know what's going on.
Yeah, I had read the synopsis like when we first picked it, and then as I was reading the book halfway through, I'm like, I don't know what's happening. Like, I don't know what the point of this book is. And then the Ponzi scheme is introduced, and I was like, oh, that's right. Yeah. For the first half of the book, it just felt like a lot of meandering storylines and like these different characters that you're following their lives, but you're not really sure how they're interconnected. So yeah, about halfway through the book, I still had no idea what was going on.
Yeah, I liked it for like I don't know. It reminded me of Station 11, even though it's not like Station 11 plot wise, but it still has that like Station 11 has the same kind of all these little characters and how they interact and stuff. And she like makes you care about these characters, even though you don't remember them. Like I remember the feeling of like caring about them and sort of like wanting to know what was going to happen with them, but also not having an emotional connection. It's really odd because I don't have any other books besides her books where I feel this way. Like I don't remember the characters' names really. Even from Station 11, like I couldn't tell you what happened in Station 11 besides there being like everything that happened plague-wise in Station 11. But otherwise it's like I couldn't tell you anything, but I remember deeply caring when I was reading it. And the same thing is true of this one. Like I really wanted to know everything and how, everybody's lives kind of intertwined, but again, I couldn't tell you. Then there was kind of the sci-fi element of like the ghosts.
Yeah, that
because it was like, are these real ghosts? And there's a lot of like thematic elements of this book. This book is less about the plot and more about the themes.
Yeah.
I don't really have anything to add.
I
was so
go ahead.
I was so like overwhelmed at first that there were so many characters and like so many threads that it was so far apart, and I had to write them all down to keep track. Sweeney in the chat said that A Visit from the Goon Squad reminded
I literally was going to say it's like Visit from the Goon Squad.
Yeah, and I totally agree. I totally agree. I really enjoyed that book and how it all starts to come together. And you do get invested, but I couldn't tell you a single character from the Goon Squad.
I had the same feeling too of like A Visit from the Goon Squad and Station 11. I also thought a little bit about, this is weird, but The Sun Is Also a Star by Nicola Yoon.
Yeah.
And that has like a very strong like central plot of like this romance, but she does this really interesting thing where she just gives you a chapter from a point of view from like a random character that they come across. And it creates this thing where you get this idea of like, okay, this is one person's story, but also it is a story about how they touch all of these different people like walking throughout this day. And each of those people have their own personal story as well. We might not be following it, but you get this it's big sense of like the interconnectedness, like the big web of people. And that's what this was doing in a lot of ways where, yeah, sure, it was like Vincent's story at the heart of it and what led her to disappearing from off this boat. But at the same time, it's like all of these people that she touched, and it's a lot of people. And I think that was one of my favorite things about Station 11 was that it was like, it wasn't just, it was a pandemic, but it also was like about like how these people all connected from before the pandemic, during the pandemic, and all of that stuff. So that's why I'm like, I feel like in my feelings, it's not this book's fault that I'm in quarantine and I don't want to read. And like, it's not, this book was really well done. And I feel like if I read it at some other time, it would benefit from rereading because I would feel like I picked up on all of the other threads and follow the characters better. I'd probably be in a better reading mood and I could like better appreciate what she created. But like reading it right now, it's just like, It's not the book's fault. I don't feel it. So I think, Sam, you mentioned how it's like very also like in addition to being about all these characters or whatever, it's very heavy on the themes. Mm-hmm. So what were some of the themes that you guys picked up on or enjoyed or didn't enjoy from the book in general?
Ooh, so rich people being their own kingdom and money being its own kingdom. I loved that.
I did like that a lot.
Oh my God. The whole time. Like any discussion of wealthy people just being on like a whole different planet, I'm just like, absolutely. And I like reading books about people that are just like stupidly wealthy in a way that's just like ridiculous. Mm-hmm. So I enjoyed that. But there was a lot of things, especially with Vincent's history and then her friend's history, where it's like, she even mentions, like at this point, it's like, I'm just spending money because I can. And a lot of those themes, I think, were really cool. And with the ghosts, just like the themes of like kind of regret and things like that too. So those two were my two favorite threads throughout the story.
Yeah, I really like the ghosts too, because it felt sort of like you didn't know if it was something that was actually happening to them or if it was just like a manifestation of like things that were haunting them, like theoretically. And that was what I really enjoyed. And I enjoyed like there was a lot of repetition in the story, especially because she ends up, the same thing happens to her that happened to her mom when she was 13. And she sort of resented that like event happening, and that sort of set off everything. And it was just all leading back to the same place, sort of. Mm-hmm. So I really liked like the full progression of the story back to the beginning.
On my list was definitely the money stuff, and it was like at first she's just like talking about like the kingdom of money, but the more and more she talks about like Vincent navigates this world as somebody who didn't come from money, and like the differences that how she can feel so comfortable acting around all of the rich people but uncomfortable around the staff because she feels like these people know, or things like about how you would behave or react when you weren't used to having money at your disposal. Like all of that stuff, I was like, girl. It just felt really, really like true and honest, and it added a really interesting layer to the story in general. Because at the other opposite of it, the other big thing happening in this book is a Ponzi scheme, and all these people just throwing their money at this man who's clear, like, the book is trying to navigate how much of it was like him being a terrible person and doing this, and like the other people fooling themselves about like, obviously this was not a good thing, but you're supposed to be true. Yeah. So the fact that like money is such a big presence in this, I think, was like one of the best things about it.
And that you always have like eyes on you when you have money, like how she talked about how you would be alone, like you would build this big house so you could be alone, but really you're like surrounded by staff. And like I don't know his name, but the Ponzi leader, like he always had this pressure because all these people had these high expectations. So everyone's always looking at you. And then I guess you could bring in like the glass hotel, like everyone's looking in on you. Yeah. Always have eyes on you. And then he even has, at the end of his life, he has all these regrets, like the people that have killed themselves and died, like watching him. So you're always like watched. So.
Well, she made a comment too, like, how all the rich people could ignore the staff because they've always grown up with like that extra layer of people around them. And she's like, this is a job that I would have been doing had I not been in this position. So I can't just ignore them the same way.
And that, I mean, in addition to like the whole money thing, that idea of like anonymity too is like a big thing. And like Liz was saying, the glass hotel or whatnot. And this idea of like rich people being able to purchase a level of like privacy and being alone, but also never really getting to be alone. And then you have Vincent with, no money, and then she gets into the kingdom of money, but then she loses it and then basically fades away. And so who really has privacy and anonymity, and how money plays into that, I think is like a really, really big theme as well. Mm-hmm. One of the like circular things about the storytelling that actually really paid off. There were a lot of things where I'm like, I feel like I should like make more connections here, and I don't know if I just forgot or like I'm not following. But one of the big ones that just like got me was the entire story of the graffiti on the hotel.
Yes,
and like what I hope you would swallow glass or whatever it was, what that meant, and why one guy did it, and then you meet the person who originally said it, and you're like, How did you know? How did you know that she said that? And then you get to the point where she paid him to write it on the hotel or whatnot. And that full circle just was like really, really satisfying.
Yeah. That was part at the beginning that I was like, there's a mystery element to this story that it doesn't like sell itself as a mystery, but they're like the mystery of like who wrote the thing. Was it Paul? Why did he write it? Like that kept me kind of going through parts of the story because I was like, I want to know why this happened.
It's not a high stakes mystery either. It's just like
exactly.
You really care about who wrote it.
Exactly. Like, the elements of it that like the mystery elements were so like just daily life mysteries that you could sort of just see happening in your own life instead of these like really overblown things that you see in a lot of like thrillers and mystery novels and stuff like that. So that was really cool because it kind of felt like you were in on gossip and you're like, I want to know like who did this thing. So yeah, that was really satisfying. But yeah, when the the former wife said the thing, I was like, oh, like that started coming back together. That was cool.
And Paul was the one who wrote on the window, and then Vincent wrote on the
because he knew
something as a teenager in the school.
Yeah. And she was so like upset about that being written, and I was like, "Girl, you did it before." So yeah, it was just like all of it. It was interesting how all of it tied together.
And even just the reactions of everybody because of it said like swallow glass or whatever. I get it, like it's like rude or whatever, but everybody was like,
It was the scariest thing I've ever said.
calm down, everyone.
Right. There was a line too that I just remember for some reason that someone's like, you can't even swallow glass, like it's not possible. Like, and I just keep remembering it. I was like, oh, you can't swallow glass. I don't know. It stuck out to me for some reason.
Anything else like that like connections or things that really struck you?
The girl in the band, who I don't
Yes,
remember.
that kept coming back.
Yes, that was connected to the guy with the Ponzi schemes. Like one of the guys there was trying to recruit her as like a musician, and then she's playing later sometime in the book. Like she kept coming back around, and I actually thought at the beginning when like I thought when at the beginning when Paul like he didn't accidentally kill him because it whatever, but like when he was involved in the band, I thought that band was going to be like a major threat, and she was just this like touchstone throughout. I thought was interesting too.
Or how Paul was doing the
Did you just see the comment?
I just saw it, Nicole. As the one I can say we are not all like this and mysterious. I feel like it was more New York than anything. It was interesting because they came from Vancouver, which is known to be one of the most expensive cities to live in now. But I guess it was different back in like the 90s or whenever this was set in the beginning. It would obviously have been different. But that was an interesting choice on her part to make that the city they originally came from. Because Toronto is like equated to being the New York, but really Vancouver has more of the elements minus like having all of the nature in terms of like pricing and the kind of people that live there. Like the wealth disparity is really different there. So yeah, I feel like that might have been part of the reason, because that's obviously why they went to Vancouver Island, because it is one of the more wealthier places that people would go. But yeah, otherwise that's the only thing. Everything else is very New York. We're a lot nicer, I swear. That is like the one true thing about Canadians. This is crazy.
So somebody just said Colette's journey that maybe they dramatized the graffiti because of the remoteness.
Yeah.
It was one of them.
Well, it's remote. It's a very wealthy hotel. So like just the fact that anybody would vandalize it in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
I think Walter brings that up. He's like, they obviously had to come through the forest somehow to do this and go away. So obviously either somebody's like lurking about in the darkness or it was somebody there.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, Jordan, you were going to say something about Paul when Nicole was
he was stealing vintage tapes and made like a whole art career out of it. I thought when that popped up, when that circle came back around, was a little shocking as well. I'm like, oh.
I thought so too. And I think the thing about that and like, so the whole thing is it's the Ponzi scheme, but it's also like set around the 2008 crash in general, and just like, that devastation. And then like, and in so many ways, it's about people taking things from other people. And so like Paul takes this bit of his sister, and then, but he's also taking the music of these people. And, but also he was like, indirect or directly in like a death of one of their band members, and just the way that everybody like hurts each other and takes from each other in all of these ways, like around like the bigger, larger like Ponzi scheme thing, I thought was really, really interesting.
Yeah, it's like the idea of climbing over whoever you have to get to the top.
And there was like an element of fraud throughout the entire thing, because like there's the Ponzi scheme fraud, but also like the frauds, like the lies we tell ourselves to get by, but also that everybody else is told. Like they'll see something for themselves and they're actually just not seeing the truth. So I feel like the whole book too had like an element of that going throughout it.
The fraudulent lives you take on, like masks you take on.
And to that end, like I felt really, really hurt for Vincent when she came across her best friend again. And her best friend just like pretended not to know who she was.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh no, it was really sad. Like I from the best friend's perspective, but I was just like, acknowledge her.
It's almost worse than confronting them and like getting angry at them, is to just completely pretend they don't exist.
Yes.
That's gotta be rough.
Yeah.
Especially because she said her name like multiple times to her, and it was like just totally ignored her.
And not only totally ignored her, but like treated her like the bartender, like, you know, like, get me this, thank you, kind of thing. It was just a stab in the heart kind of thing.
Yeah, she felt like the emotion from being like the person who was on the other side of the bar. Like she would normally be the person that could ignore somebody, but now she was the person being ignored again after seeing how it would be to be on the other side of things.
And the like Vincent, the way that she feels like a fraud, kind of being in the kingdom of money and then losing all of that. But also I feel like because she didn't like finish high school or like get an education, like we get a lot of that thinking throughout as well. And anytime she was like, I read the newspaper because I wanted to be informed, or I did this because I wanted, like that sort of thing, I really related to, just in terms of like always feeling like that anxiety or that fear of like sounding stupid or not knowing what you're talking about is something that is like a fear of mine. So anytime she was like, oh no, like I need to keep up, I was like, yeah, girl, I feel that. Fraud like spoke to me.
There was an interesting conversation too at one point where they're talking about like I could go back to school and get a degree, but then I see people in my same position with degrees and lots of debt and doing the same thing, and I was like, I deeply feel that. I feel
that. Yeah, Connor, you're muted somehow. Okay, yeah, now we can hear you.
Okay. I think my computer messed up. I keep like trying to add things, and I'm like, okay. But there was
like to add.
Well, there was the one we were talking about people lying to themselves and like being worried about being perceived as stupid or unintelligent. Like that's the whole reason why Walter even invested his money with the Ponzi scheme in the first place. He's like, I didn't understand what he was saying, but I just said yes because I didn't want to be stupid. Really like, oh yeah, people do that a lot.
That's why I think the lady who ends up like turning him in, or like, even though the first time he didn't get caught by the SEC or whatever, but when he was explaining how he invests, and she was like, yes, girl, because everybody else was just like, oh, okay, I don't get it, but like, sure. And, like we've done. Like everybody, I feel like can relate to like that kind of reaction, but her being like, I'm gonna I'm gonna Google this. I was like, yeah, girl.
And I think part of it like can relate to the way we place like absolute trust in certain people. Like, of course, they would believe that he would be able to get them these returns on money because of who he is and like his background. And I feel like that was also something she explored because of like his innate wealth and like just being a rich, privileged white guy compared to Vincent, who didn't have an education and kept referring to like the fact that everybody wants to get somewhere. They're all in debt because they're in school. Like she kept bringing up the fact that bettering yourself costs something. Yeah. Whether it was like the monetary value of college or like when she made the choice to become his like fake wife.
Like it's, you know, she kept calling it transactional. So this is also a lot about like the transactions between people. See, this is like where I'm like, this book is so smart. This book is like the more I talk about it, I'm like, yeah, see, 4 or 5 steps. I was reading it, I was just like, I could not keep up. Like I couldn't keep up sometimes. Like,
I had to watch interviews because I was like, I feel like there's so much more here that I'm not understanding personally, and I need to figure out what it is because I really did enjoy it, and I feel like there's more I can enjoy from it.
So to that end, like before we did this live show, somebody I think had tweeted us or asked Connor, like basically like if we would be talking about like, did you have to read Station 11 to follow this conversation? And we said, no, we're not going to spoil Station 11. But then I started reading and I was like, hold up, like referencing Station 11 in this book. So have you guys read Station 11? And did you pick up any of like the threads that cross over? And we'll do our best not to spoil that other book, as I said, but just to kind of talk about the connections, because these two stories are connected. So
yeah, I've read Station 11, and we talked about this briefly before we actually went live, and I didn't pick up any connections. I mean, granted, I read Station 11, I think in like 2017, so it's been a long time. And I think also anytime a pandemic was mentioned in the book, I was like, like I just like did not zoom in on it. I was like, fuck that. So I think it's just like, I wasn't picking up on it because I was like trying to ignore it. So yeah, and if there were any characters that overlapped, I don't know if there are, you guys will tell me. It's been so long since I read Station 11 that I wouldn't have picked up on any character names. So it's cool to know that it was connected. I like that, but I did not notice.
I haven't read it. I haven't read Station 11, but I did pick up just because I knew somewhat what the premise is of Station 11. So like when they were talking about whatever flu, Georgia flu or something like that, I was like, oh, this is where it overlaps. But I don't know any of the characters that overlap.
Yeah, I have not read Station 11, but it's cool to know that there are connections between the two books. It makes me a little bit more interested in going to read Station 11. I love when authors do that with their books.
Are there characters that overlap? I'd be curious to know that.
Yeah, I haven't read it either, but when I was watching interviews with the author, she obviously talks about stuff that was like mirrored in both of the stories. So I kind of know some of the characters that are going to be there. I do want to go back and read it, but not right now. Like 5 years from now.
Now is so not a good time to read.
Not a good time. The beginning is set in Toronto. I remember the beginning is set in Toronto because I did start reading it at one point, and I'm like, I'm really glad I did not read this because this will probably make everything way worse for me right now.
For sure. So I read Station 11. I consider it one of my favorite books, but it's also usually my favorite books I reread like pretty regularly, but I cannot go back to that book, not only because of previous to now, because it's like a lot. It's just the entire concept of like the pandemic and the world ending or whatever. It's like a lot. And it gave me a lot of feelings. So like thinking about rereading it is always like, oh, do I want to do that to myself kind of thing. Somebody asked in the chat if they gave The Glass Hotel 2 stars because they got bored halfway through. Like, legitimate. Will you enjoy Station 11 if I read it? I personally liked Station 11 probably more than this one, and I liked it more immediately. Like it wasn't like a thing with this one where I'm like, I feel like if I reread it, I'd like it more. I loved Station 11 immediately, and I think the thing that Station 11 does better is it has more urgency in the plot, more forward motion. I think it just is a little bit quicker than The Glass Hotel. Like this was such a passive sort of like plot that you kind of get lost in all of the themes and the threads or whatever, where the like pandemic itself in Station 11 is enough of a big thing that you're like more engaged. I feel
there's
like
more urgency to it.
Yeah, and it's even weird to say like it's faster because The Glass Hotel to me read super fast. Like I every time I went to pick it up, I was kind of like, ugh. But then I would sit down and read a chunk of it and be like, almost, like it was going very quickly. But yeah, I think Station 11 definitely has more of a forward motion. So yeah, there are crossovers between characters. It's not like it's weird because I thought when I'm reading this that it would be like this world in like a future is what Station 11 is about. But Paige, you said in an interview, she says it was like parallel worlds.
Yeah, she like peppers it throughout The Glass Hotel that people are always imagining like other alternate realities where different things happen. And she said in the interview, she doesn't like think that everything that happens in Station 11 happened after this, but that the characters are living in an alternate reality. So the people we see in The Glass Hotel are alternate versions of the people you would see in Station 11. Yeah,
that's interesting because I was just thinking about how they call it like the kingdom of money, but then they also have like the other world, and then like the place that the Ponzi, I can't remember I don't know anyone, but like when he goes into his brain and he's like in the alternate reality and what would happen, like, anyone that was involved in the Ponzi scheme or imagining where they would have escaped to. So it's interesting that she would say it's in parallel worlds because I think that's definitely like a theme of the book is alternate worlds within each other.
Yeah.
I think it was interesting that everyone thought that, like, what was his name? Enrico, who was the one guy that fled the country and like successfully avoided getting any type of punishment. Mm-hmm. But like everyone views him as a hero, but like he's like constantly waiting to be found out.
I know. I love the one out of him. Like I just imagine him on the plane, like going to Mexico. Like that was great. As a whole family.
Yeah, he might be free, but he's just as trapped like mentally as the rest of them because he's always looking over his shoulder for the rest of his life.
Mm-hmm.
Do you guys know who the narrator was? That when they were talking about like what was happening with each of them, and the narrator kept saying like we and us.
Yeah,
who is the narrator?
That's what like they do in Virgin Suicides. It's like it's a Greek chorus kind of type. Point of view where it's like multiple people, like a collective type of narration, which I actually enjoyed.
Yeah.
I actually really enjoyed the Ponzi section. That was probably my favorite part. That's
It was.
I love Succession on HBO, and it was giving me like really big Succession vibes, like the whole Ponzi thing. I don't know.
I love that section of it too, and I don't know. I like the exploration of like at the end was this, is his name Jonathan? Did we say?
Jonathan.
Like he,
Yes.
bad guy, and you see him like falling into his regret, and obviously he's like losing kind of his grip on reality. And I felt bad for him, but then I was like he's such a bad guy. Like that, cycle. Obviously, she did that very well. So, did you guys feel that way? How do you feel about the people who like participated in this Ponzi scheme? Like, did you have sympathy for them, or was it like, nah, man, you did this to yourself, kind of thing?
It's not so much sympathy, but like, I guess I don't understand. I don't know. It's weird to like, I don't know what you would call it. Like I understand. I don't know if I understand. But like you understand how you kind of fall into like one thing, like it's like a slippery slope. Like one thing happens, and then like the one guy talks about how he had the one chance to change everything, like to go to the authorities about it, but he never did. And you just feel like you're like drowning in all this, like all these lies, and you just keep going under and under, and like there's no way to get out now at this point. So I kind of understand. They're not necessarily like good or bad people, but they've made like terrible mistakes.
Yeah.
Like the one guy he was asked to backdate like the one transaction. He said, I didn't really think of anything of it then, but then when I got asked over and over to do weird things, like I just was getting too far deep into it before I really like dawned on me what was happening. And I'm like,
the whole willful ignorance thing, I think. Because I think the whole like concept of like psychologically of like groupthink and just kind of be like almost similar to like a mob mentality where it's like it's very hard to go against what everyone else is doing psychologically. Like people can sit here and say like I would never do that, and it's like you probably would actually. You probably would. So. Yeah, it's just I think it was interesting too how they had a number of different, like she showed a number of different reactions to when they were getting caught too. Like we had the guy that left, we had the guy that went and slept with Vincent, we had like sort of tried to plan, but then like
the guy who didn't know what was going on.
Yeah, we had the guy that had no idea. We had the guy that was like writing his confession and like pulling evidence.
Yeah.
Like, which I thought was so interesting too, that like that guy cracked. Like he just was like, no, I'm gonna
I'll give you everything. Just give me a lesser sentence. Here, do all of it.
We had the woman who was like part of the family that was like sleeping under her desk. Like it was just like you had all of it. So yeah, I think what she does really well and did the same thing in Station 11 was like the humanity of people and just the like how real it is, because it's like I don't think anyone in here is necessarily like the ultimate bad guy or anything like that. Like all of them, I mean, none of them are really like likable people either. Like these people are just like, normal. Like I don't even like Vincent. You know, I just feel like I just watched you all do stuff, but like I don't have any judgment on your behavior. I mean, besides the Ponzi schemes are bad, but like as humans, I'm kind of like I'm just watching all of you, you know, like fuck up a lot, and that was kind of the fun of the story.
Even Jonathan like says, I borrowed too much money one time. I thought I could fix it with just like a little dash of something here and it would be over in a few months. And then here I am a decade later and I'm still doing this.
Right. I think that one guy has that line that it's like you can both know you're doing something and not know it.
Yeah. Oh, I love that line. I think I underlined that line.
I did too. Like it goes back to what we were saying about like the big theme, or one of the big themes being like fraud and the lies you tell yourself, because I feel like all these people knew, but even Vincent says like I knew but I didn't know. Like I knew what was happening. So like that, everybody got, even Jonathan himself was like, obviously I knew it was gonna get caught, and the reporter was like, why didn't you run away? Why didn't you like do something? It was just like everybody was so mired in their own like lies and fraud and all of that to watch it explode, it was like literally like watching a train wreck where you're just like I can't stop like looking.
And they even say that his Ponzi scheme wasn't very sophisticated either. Like it was very blatant. That makes it's almost like it would be one thing if he was like a mastermind with like some really like sophisticated plan, like Ozark's level, like laundering money. But it's more like he just never got caught and was making random decisions to like keep it going. So it makes him more sympathetic than like someone who was really like smart about it. Because it doesn't sound like he was very smart about his Ponzi scheme, and he was always expecting to get caught.
Yeah, and he didn't set out with the idea to like let me steal other people's money. It kind of he fell into it.
And it kept working.
And kept doing it.
Yeah, I think it was interesting too how they had the two different offices, and like the one office on the legitimate business was like really nice, and theirs was just like kind of gross and like just like all the old stuff, and it's just kind of like
carpet.
Yeah, like legitimately visually like the seedy underbelly of a company. Like, what? And I was like, nobody has investigated this at all. Like I thought that was interesting too.
It gave me big Bad Blood vibes.
Yes.
As I was reading it, I forget the name of the Theranos was the company, and so you're reading this like this basically takedown of how this person was faking a company and like all of these medical claims or whatever. And I was reading, and I was like, how did nobody say anything? How did nobody realize? She kept peddling this product that she didn't have and wasn't working. But what people were saying about her was the same thing that people were saying about Jonathan, this fictional work. But it was like they were so enamored with him as a person, or with like this one person, as a person, or like their claims or their fancy talk, that they were just like, he'll be okay. And so you kind of see that like that parallel here too, where people are like
separate too.
Yes, exactly.
Rated.
Yep. So it felt, the fact that I like made that parallel to like a nonfiction work, I was like, she did this good. Like this is real.
And there's also the way she told the story, because like there's a willful ignorance from everybody. From the moment we meet Jonathan, we're told things about him, and that's like how we perceive him. And we're never directly shown like the Ponzi scheme happening. So I feel like there was a lot of like secrecy shrouded around it, and she was trying to show like how something like this could happen with the way she was also telling the story, because we never really got the perspectives until everything was falling apart of what was happening.
The art theme I think was cool too, because it was really subtle, because it wasn't like this is an art book, but you have the photography, you have the music, you have the painting with the one woman that was involved with the scheme, like Jonathan's brother. And I thought that was really interesting too, is like its own, because I feel like artistic communities are also their own kingdoms at times too. So I think that was like a cool side note as well, with like the painting and everything else. And I think also that's something she does in Station 11 a bit too, with like the Shakespearean troupe or whatever that's going around. Like she just adds in these like very subtle, like in a way that makes it not snobby, but this is my own bias, but I feel like sometimes with like art stuff, if you're not an art person, it can feel very like distant. And with this, it was like, it almost made me like interested in some of the things that they were doing, which I think is always a good indicator of them doing like showing the art world well.
I think one of the things about the two books by Emily St. John Mandel that I've read, and part of the reason that it's hard to recommend or rate and review kind of her work, is that she does a little bit of everything. Like she doesn't go ham in one direction. So I remember before I read Station 11, everybody was like a Shakespearean traveling troupe at the end of the world. And I was like, okay, that sounds interesting. And you read the book and like, that's not what this book is about. Yeah. Like it has that element, but it's just about so much more. And there's parts of it that are like past, and some parts of it are the future, and parts that are like about this very dystopian thing, but parts that are very interrelational. It's just like a little bit of everything that she does. And so it's very hard to almost like talk about it. And you see that here, where it wasn't as big on the sci-fi, but you have ghosts. And it does have a little bit of music, but it has all of these other themes. And it is a Ponzi scheme, but it's also about one person's like kind of life. It almost not very slice of life, because it is like very like a lot of years, but you follow her journey very closely. So it's just so much that I don't even know what to say, what this book really is. And we've been talking about it for almost 40 minutes. I'm like, I don't know. It's a little bit of everything.
Yeah, that is something that while I was reading it, as someone that reviews, and I'm sure you guys are all going to have like a similar experience, I was like, how do I talk about this? Because this is a great book to discuss like this. But when I'm going to have to do a review, I'm like, I don't know how. And I feel like a similar way about Station 11, because when I like was hearing about Station 11, I was like, that's interesting-ish, but like I don't know why people are loving it so much. And then you read it and you're like, oh. But same thing with this, where it's like I read the synopsis and I was like, I do not care about the synopsis at all, but I trust her as a writer, and I was like, I enjoyed it. But it's like I don't know how to recommend this to somebody, because it is just so all over the place, like in a good way.
Yeah, I feel like this wouldn't be a book for somebody who really relies on plot. If they enjoy plot when they're reading, it's more about like the writing style and the characters for me. And like, yeah, like if you like a plot, this is not going to be the book for you at all. But if you like really complex writing styles and like nonlinear timelines and really like complex characters,
really
thoughtful,
very thematic.
Mostly.
This reminds me a lot of a book I would read for school. not in a bad way. Not like in a bad way.
I could see this book being read in like 50 years in schools.
Yes. Yes. There's a lot to discuss. There's a lot to unpack.
Especially with like in 2008 when the economy crashed.
Did you guys feel a sense of dread reading that though? Because you're like, it's happening again. Like,
Yes.
I was like, I don't want to read this.
The little like sprinklings of the pandemics that she would talk about in this book, and then the recession of 2008. I'm like, stop.
I'm like, stop. Like,
there's even that moment where like Jonathan is like defending himself, kind of, and he's like, well, yeah, sure, I took people's money, but it's no different than like the subprime mortgages, and I'm just like, oh, I don't want it. Anything, I'm gonna ask like the comments as well. If you guys have any questions for us about this book that we didn't cover, but for you guys, anything that we haven't mentioned that you wanted to talk about this book, any characters, themes, anything like that.
I think one of the things that I also found was interesting was how the dynamic between Paul and Vincent never changed, but it changed a lot. Like at the beginning of the book, it's very clear that Paul thinks that Vincent owes him because Vincent's mom took his dad. Mm-hmm. But then at the end, he's taken so much from her, like her videos and all that stuff, that he's now taken whatever he thought that he was owed, which was like such a weird thing.
Mm-hmm. I liked that he always referenced though that like it's not fair that I feel this way. Like he brought that up like every time he's like this is my sister. It's not fair that I feel like owed by her. And he always, there was like the self-awareness that made him, again, these characters are not likable or unlikable, but it made you almost like sympathize with him, because I was like, wow, you do shitty stuff, but I'm like, you're like self-aware though. Like I gotta kind of give you credit there that it's like he knows even as like a teenager like what he was doing and why he was feeling this way, and he was trying to not feel that way about her, but he just like couldn't help it because your feelings are your feelings.
And we see his spiral there. Like everybody in this book is falling into some sort of spiral, and his is like, I took your videos and I put some music to it, but then people really liked it and I had to keep doing this thing, and now it's like it like spiraled for him. So I really like that part almost at the end where he starts thinking like, if I could have told her, this is what I should have said, like this is what I would have wanted to say to her. And you really get the sense that he is self-aware, like he realizes what he's done. So
and I liked when Vincent is like, she's like going through all the scenes and she's like with her brother and she's like, he's not saying anything, and then she just moves on because it shows him like building up what he's going to say, and then he gets the moment to say it and he doesn't say anything, and she just goes on.
It reminds me of that TikTok. Have you guys seen it where it's like, this is for Rachel? But then the TikTok is like, that's you practicing to yourself what you would say to somebody. But in reality, you're like, oh, I'm Rachel. Why you took me off the schedule?
Thinking about this, there's a line, and I wrote it down because I really liked it, where it says, it's turned out that never having the conversation meant that you are somehow condemned to always have the conversation.
Yes.
And as somebody with anxiety, I was like, oh man.
As somebody who's multiple times been like in the shower, in the mirror, practicing what I would have said after the fact.
Yes. Like knowing that a confrontation should happen or is about to happen, you're just kind of like, what's gonna happen? Okay, if they say this, what am I gonna say? And that's what he was doing, and it was just like, yeah, you're constantly stuck in just this conversation that never happened.
To take it like real personal, right? I mean, that's obviously like during the pandemic, things are going crazy. So I got laid off from my job, and literally the call that was like informing me of it lasted like 5 minutes because my boss was like, okay, anything else? I was like, no, okay, bye. And then afterwards I was like, I didn't say anything. I should have said this and I should have said that. And like in the moment you react to survive or like get out. But then not having that conversation means that the last 2 weeks I've been having the conversation that I should have had in my head. So that one hit home, man. Anything else from you guys or from the comments?
one last thing that I was like, oh, that was interesting, was how she slipped in some commentary on like the U.S. criminal justice system and how like lengthy prison sentences are. Like there's this whole group of people at the jail that like are lifers and will be there until they die, when it's like, okay, well, it doesn't matter after a certain amount of time. Like,
yeah, how many years did he have? He had like
170.
Yeah.
Why that amount? It doesn't make sense. That's a lot of time.
Like, it's just ridiculous.
I read
For
it
all
on
12 of his accounts.
yeah.
Yeah.
I read it on audiobook, and it's that point where he's like, on count 1, how do you plead? And it was like 12 or 13 or 14, whatever it is, count. And so like listening to it, each one go through the audiobook, and on this count, I plead guilty. Like it took some time to get through them all, and I was just like, Jesus. So it's like really effective in that part of like listening.
When I was reading, I just went and scanned.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was like, I get it. Okay.
All right, 1 through 12. Okay.
You're like, I get it.
Yeah.
But listening to it, I had to listen to like each
Yeah.
count, and each like plead, or you know, him pleading guilty to each one, and it was like really, really effective.
I feel like this would have been a good audiobook for, like, I didn't listen to an audiobook, but I feel like it would have been a good choice too. It sounds like it was a good audiobook.
I think also she carried over that count thing into the first and last chapters. So they're like separated into 6 seconds, and like each second is the next number. So it like had that rhythm.
Mm-hmm.
That was really
The audiobook was good. The narrator was good. I enjoyed it, except for I think it added to some of the confusion, because in reading, if you're like Walter, you can be like, who the hell is Walter? And flip back and be like, Walter.
Mm-hmm.
Which listening to an audiobook, I was just like, don't know who you are. Keep going.
Well, I read it as an ebook, so I couldn't flip back anyway.
Okay.
Yeah, I read the first like 200 pages, I think, like physically, and then I switched to audio because by that point I knew all the characters, so I felt comfortable listening. Because when I first started, I started with the audio trying to listen. I was like, this is too confusing. Let me get the actual book.
Yeah.
And like that was like the best way for me to do it.
Like, I think I'd like to reread this as an audiobook.
I think the best way to read this, and I know this is like totally ridiculous, especially if you're like, you got that kind of money. But the best way is listening and reading
While reading it.
And reading.
Book on tape sort of like style of like seeing and hearing is like probably where it's at for this one. All right, here's my final question, and it's not a question about this book, but because we referenced it so much throughout this, like, how are you guys doing? And what is your reading life like now during whatever day of like self-isolation and quarantine? Are you guys reading pretty consistently? What are you guys interested in right now?
I'm reading a ton. I think I'm going to end up reading 13 or 14 books this month, and it's because of the Owls Readathon. So thanks for that.
Way to go, Sam.
So yeah, I don't know how long I'm going to last with that. I'm basically like pushing off any other hobbies because I'm like, just focus on this if you're in it right now.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to like read until I burn out and then play video games.
We're doing well. I am in the middle of finals for my last semester of law school. It's been such a weird transition, jumping from in class, like you have to be in class, to everything being online, but we still have to be there at the same time that we would be there. It's weird, but that's almost done. And reading, it's been off and on. Like sometimes I'm in the mood and I can like power through books, but then other times I'm just like, I don't want to do anything.
I have been laid off from my job for like 4 weeks now, so time has no meaning anymore. Reading wise, reading new things has been a struggle. Like this was really hard for me to get through, but going back and rereading my favorites has been super easy. So like I read 2 of Sarah J. Maas's books this month, which were both like 600-page books. But then like reading this was really hard. So like I'm finding it easier to jump into old favorites than it is to do new things.
I have been reading a lot. I've been reading more than I have in like the last few years because I feel like I can't go anywhere. So I have a lot of time on my hands. And I actually find it very cathartic to read like real downers. You were talking about 11. I read Severance by Ling Ma, which is like literally about like a pandemic kind of. The pandemic is not similar, but a lot of the things that happen in her book are things that are actually happening now. And she wrote it 2 years ago. And like she even mentions like the different kind of masks we're like trying to get, like all this stuff. Like it's ridiculous. I also read My Absolute Darling. I forget who it's by, and that is literally the worst book of all. It's rough. There's a lot of bad things that happen in it. But like I find it, I'm someone that leans more into like the terrible things when terrible things are happening. I don't know why. But I've definitely been reading a lot more. So
I'm the complete opposite because
I'm avoidance. I'm like, let's avoid.
Like emotions first. So if I'm already stressed or like emotional about things, like I don't have the capacity. I don't want to take on like fictional stress because I like take it very personally when I'm reading. So I've been like reading absolutely nothing. This was such a struggle. And I've been like here and there, I've been rereading favorites. So I started rereading the Fairyland series, but I've only read the first 3, and it's taken me like a month to get through like 200-page books, basically. So it's been real bad on the reading front so far, but yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, and I've been lucky. Like my job is pretty much unaffected because I do mostly online stuff. I'm busier, if anything, but because I work with books, I tend not to want to read after work. So all of my reading is like pushed to the weekend. Like right now, I'm filming a 24 hours. How many books can I read video? So I read this entire fucking book. I started at 12 and I finished it at 12 p.m. So I'm gonna try to read the book for book club tomorrow that I have to read. So I've been like reading in like huge chunks on the weekends, but not much during the week. Usually I'm just like watching a Netflix show to like turn my brain off.
And to that end, I guess I will announce our May book club.
So
here's how this happened. Like books to pick for this. What we wanted to do was very much balance like newer releases, big releases with like backlist books, so that we can kind of like shuffle who can participate and when, and like read from different genres and everything. So we were like, okay, we read this, which was a newer release. What's a backlist book that we can read? And then we're like, okay, let's get like a backlist book that is like an old booktube favorite. Like let's read something that used to be very popular. And we considered The Uglies for a little bit, but we're like, nah, too real. We don't want any discussion. Let's get out of here with that. So somehow, well, because there was an announcement about this like series recently, we decided that we are going to read The Selection by Kira Cass. So this is a reread for me.
Same. I read the entire 5. I read all 5 of them. All 5 of them.
I read all 5 of them too.
I'm actually really excited. I hated this book when I read it, but I'm like legitimately happy to read this.
I remember when everyone was reading it and how much they hated the main character, and I'm really not looking forward to that.
See, I did not have a problem with her, and I gave this book 5 stars when I first read it.
So I haven't read it. I don't know if Connor's read it.
I've never read it.
Yeah,
I have not. No.
It'd be so good.
We're like half and half. I'm really excited. Hopefully you guys will, read along with us if you are so inclined. And also I know lots of people read this already, like back when it was like in its heyday. And I think it's a Netflix movie that's coming out. It's a movie, right? Not a series.
Yeah, I think it's a movie.
Yeah, the Netflix movie that is being made about this whole thing. So join us as we read. It'll be really interesting to read some 2012 dystopian romance, whatever. And that's it, right?
Yeah, just to preface it too, we're not gonna like this. So like yes,
who knows?
Like,
I might love it.
Jordan might. Jordan might. But like I don't want anyone to go in and be like, oh my god, you destroyed it. What? We're reading it to like have fun and for it to be mindless. So don't come into it being like the biggest Selection fan. Just don't come next time. Like we're just not gonna have a good time. I just want to like warn people.
I'm very curious to see how Jordan feels about it, because so far she has rated every single book we've read the lowest out of
Jordan has been our harshest critic. Like for real. She has been like the hardest on all of the books.
Except for last month.
It's
I
true.
liked the one last month.
Oh, okay, that's right.
I did say something. I was like, hey, we've been like we did, middling about all of the books we've read so far, or at least a good spread. And everybody jumped on me. They were like, you were the only one who didn't like last month's. We all loved it. I'm not going to like this book because I have already not liked this book. But also, I don't know, it's quarantine.
It might be great though.
Right.
They said that it's free on Kindle Unlimited right
Yeah,
now.
it's free on
Yeah,
Kindle.
it is.
It might be perfect. It might be what we all need.
True. Yeah. I'm just making sure everyone comes in with like low expectations so that if we like it more, then that's going to be a surprise.
Like nobody invited your cast to this live show.
No, no one tell Kiracast.
She's actually very nice.
Yeah, she seems like a very nice person.
She's very, very, very sweet. We met her at one Y'all Fest and we were like, oh no.
And that show's going to be on
May 30th, and we're going to do it a little bit later next time. Mostly because I said I wanted to be drinking during this live.
Oh my God, it's so good. I'm so excited now.
We're going to get drunk. And talk about the selection. So it's going to be May 30th at 4 p.m. Eastern time, back on Sam, Thoughts on Tom's channel. We'll tweet out all the links and all the information, but we hope you will join us for the selection in May. And thank you for joining us this week to talk about the Glass Hotel. I almost called it the Glass Castle. Thanks, Liz. All right, see you guys next time.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.